And we are live for another edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. I am one of your co-hosts, Nicholas Pavona, joined alongside once again by Andrew Johnson. And Andrew, we kind of expected maybe a little bit of a slower week of college football. We obviously had a big top 10 matchup in Ann Arbor this past week that we're going to break down a little bit later on in the show. But some of the other games were, games that we're going to be, keep our eye on for this week in anticipation for this upcoming week number 3. But we certainly were not expecting one of the more bigger upsets we've ever had, maybe in recent time for college football history, that happened this past week. A top 5 team goes down at home, and it really shook up the college football world in terms of not only the playoff, but for now, where that university goes, as well as the team that beat them, as now they enter the top 25 for the first time, I think, since 2013. So again, and a little bit looking ahead towards our later portions of the show as well for the top 25 reveal. But what a week number 2 we have, and I'm sure week number 3 coming up this weekend is going to be even better. So we'll have to see what happens on, what will all unfold. But biggest takeaway from this past Saturday, Johnson, is it the game that I've been alluding to?
I believe so. You know what's absolutely sickening about that game, Bill?
The I mean, there's a lot of sickening things about that game. So I don't know if you could pick one,
The
but
most
go for it.
sickening thing is that Notre Dame is still not only in the top 25, they're number 18. And since they're number 18, they can still sneak their way into the college football playoffs just because of the way their schedule is set up. Because they're going to have a big matchup versus USC later down the line. And
That's
they win that
that's
game, they go
yeah.
undefeated, they're still in the playoffs. So I would say after that game initially, their playoff window was shut, but they left the window open.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what their percentage now of making the college football playoff is after
It was
this
probably
debacle.
90% week one, and now it's probably 30% right now.
Yeah, because
I could actually get you the live odds. I'll get you the live odds right now if you give me a second here.
yeah, take your time. I'll break down what actually happened since we've been alluding it to, and Notre Dame. I mean, a couple years ago, we saw a similar instance for the Fighting Irish when they were, a top 10 team, I think, in the country. They were at home. They lost to Marshall, pretty much ruined their entire season. Well, that's probably exactly what happened once again this past Saturday. Another MAC team going into South Bend, taking on the Irish, who were coming off a big win on the road the previous week. They beat Texas A&M in a top 25 showdown. Were able to get a great, strong defensive game in that one. And for the intent purposes of this game, they did a good job once again defensively. The issue for Notre Dame in this one against Northern Illinois, their offense was putrid in this one, especially from the quarterback position, unfortunately, for the Irish, that being Riley Leonard. And Northern Illinois, you got to tip the caps to them. What an upset they pull off in this game. The first time they have defeated a top 5 team in school history. I think their first ranked win over a ranked top 25 team since, I want to say, 2006, 2007. And they did it on a last second field goal. Their defense played phenomenal in this game. And they knock off the fifth ranked Irish 16-14 to go to 2-0 on the season. And we'll talk about them in a little bit later on in the show in terms of their top 25 status, because for the first time since 2013, they are ranked as a top 25 team in the nation. So, we talk about those group of 5 contenders, when it comes to the college football playoff. If Northern Illinois, who knows, if they continue this is sustained success as the season goes along, they could be that group of 5 team that enters into the college football playoff and surprisingly enough, maybe competes for a chance to make it to the quarterfinal potentially, or even further in this year's CFP. But as you mentioned for Notre Dame, now we have to figure out what their current odds are as we look towards the rest of their schedule on this season.
So to get back to you, Nick, those live odds, I shouldn't say the live odds, but those odds to make the college football playoffs, plus 260 for Kansas State, plus 200 for Clemson, plus 250 for LSU, and plus 300 for Notre Dame. So Notre Dame is in that 200 to 300 range. So they think they're probably, if they, the sports books think they're going to probably finish just outside to like near that 13 to 16 range with
Yeah.
Clemson, LSU, Kansas State, and yeah, they're all lumped together there. So it's not so far off the beaten path. Like, oh yeah, they're completely out of it. They left the window open. So depending if they beat USC, because USC is a plus 164 favorite. So I'm assuming if USC continues to win, and if Notre Dame beats them later in the season, their odds are going to flip. That would be my guess.
Well, let's keep in mind also for Notre Dame, and again, they're going to have to fix whatever offensive issues they have for the rest of the season because obviously this game was an eyesore. They already struggled in offense on the first game of the season, but did just enough to beat A&M. In this game, they did not do that at all. We saw a decent running game. Jeremiah Love, I think that was the problem for Notre Dame. They didn't really run the football as often as they should have. Jeremiah Love gave them a solid performance in this game, gave them near 80 yards rushing and a great rushing touchdown. They gave Notre Dame at that point a 14-13 lead in the third quarter. The problem was offensively, Riley Leonard just struggled overall in this game. 20 of 32, 163 yards, two interceptions, and both of those interceptions were pretty bad INTs in this game. And his last one came in a point where there was about 4 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Northern Illinois was able to run the clock down and get it down to I think 30 seconds left, and Notre Dame had a chance at the end to maybe set themselves up for the game-winning field goal, but they wasted a lot of time. They didn't have any timeouts. They tried to go for a 62-yard field goal, and their field goal was blocked, and that was the second time in the game that they had a field goal blocked in the game. So there's an overall bad performance from the Irish in this one in a game that you expected them to win. And if you look at the remaining schedule for them, Purdue, I think Purdue this upcoming weekend will be a tough task because you're going into Purdue. That probably won't be an easy game to win. You got Louisville coming up as well, who's a ranked opponent. Who knows what Stanford is this season? Obviously, Georgia Tech just came off a loss this past weekend, but they could definitely provide a matchup with the Irish as we've seen so far. I mean, I would say Florida State. I don't know what you're going to get out of them. Right now, they look really bad, but if they start picking up some momentum, maybe they give the Irish a run for their money later on in the season. And then, as you mentioned, that matchup at USC to round out the season. So the opportunity is still there for the Irish, but it seems as if they can't afford to lose another game this season in order for them to make the college football playoff. So they need to make sure that this offense that was really, really bad this past weekend fixes their momentum going into the rest of the season. And at best, they finish at a record of 11-1.
Yeah, so pressure's on Notre Dame, backs against the wall. You really didn't have one game to lose. You lost one, but you have a window open to playoffs because no one expected USC to be
You
good.
had
So not
room to
only do you
lose
have to,
one, but this was not the one to lose.
not yeah, definitely not the one. The A&M game was the mulligan. So,
The A&M
um,
game or the USC game was by far their mulligan game to lose.
well, USC
And
they were expecting to win, but no one expected USC to be good. So not only do you have to not lose out, you have to
yeah,
hope USC is good too now. So you have to hope that the new Big Ten schedule they can live up to it. I want to talk about the absolute beatdown that occurred in
whew.
Ann Arbor this past week.
Yeah, you talk about Big Ten.
Texas, Quinn Ewers in the stands, horns were down, but there had to be about 15 to 20,000 Longhorns. In the end, hanging out in that stadium, having a great time, as Texas just steamrolls Michigan into submission. It wasn't even a game in the second half. I mean, it was
It
you could
wasn't
have
even a game
stopped
in the
this
first
game.
half,
Yeah,
realistically.
so, yeah. Realistically, you could have stopped this game by halftime. They stopped scoring. It wouldn't have been close. It was just that kind of game for the Longhorns. Quinn Ewers
Yeah,
is continuing to strengthen his odds or strengthen his case for National Player of the Year, National
Heisman.
Championship. Yeah, it's just he wants the whole bag. He wants the whole bag of marbles and then some.
I'm sorry, I was reading a report on Puka Nakua. I was trying to see if they put him on the IR. I know, obviously, our fantasies for the NFL. We'll talk about this on our next episode. But our fantasy seasons, as well as our NFL season, have been off to a rocky start, at least for me, part wise. But I digress. Going back to this game, Johnson, you talked about it. I mean, Quinn Ewers looked phenomenal in this one. And I mentioned it last week on the show, and I said the biggest concern for me with Michigan right now is their offense has looked really bad in the first game of the season against Fresno State. They really could not move the ball. They tried running it with, a guy in Donovan Edwards that had a lot of hype going into this season. The guy replacing Blake Corum. Everyone was expecting Donovan Edwards to be that next man up for Michigan, especially after what he did in the CFP last year for the Wolverines. And right now, they haven't gotten that production from him. I mean, he has not really been able to run the football in the first 2 games of the season. I think he has 77 or 78 yards combined rushing in his first 2 games of the season. And the other big problem is the quarterback play. I mean, they have I believe, a walk on right now, Davis Warren playing at starting quarterback. He has not looked great in his first 2 games. He threw 2 interceptions in this one against Texas. Um, I think for me, what it comes down to it in this game is what did this game really prove to me? Did this prove to me that Texas is going to be legitimate as the season goes along and being, a threat to teams like Georgia and Bama or whatever, and not only in the SEC, but for the college football playoff? Or did this game just prove to me that Michigan is just not going to be that team that we obviously saw last season? We know that they lost a lot of players, but you were expecting Michigan to maybe at least still contend in the Big Ten this season and pose a threat to some of these other, these new teams coming in, as well as the teams like Ohio State and Penn State, the returning teams. And right now, it looks as if Michigan is just not going to be even in contention to compete with some of these teams. And this is a really big eyesore for them after what happened this past weekend. So there's really two conversations you could have after this game. Obviously, you got to give your hats off to Texas after what they did because, they were expected to win big. They were a touchdown favorite going into the game, but you knew it was still going to be a tough game regardless because going into Ann Arbor, never an easy place to play in. And especially when you're the third ranked team, they're the 10th ranked team at the time. Top 10 matchup, it always is nationally televised and it's going to be a big game slated. And it's a game that we've marked since last season ended. And unfortunately for Michigan, just nothing went right for them offensively. They struggled in the first half defensively. Quinn Ewers had a day, as you mentioned, 3 passing touchdowns. And Texas makes a big statement. This is a big win for the Longhorns, probably the biggest win they've had in recent memory. And if you look at the rest of their schedule, you have the Red River rivalry coming up in next month, as well as Georgia, and that's a back-to-back weeks for Texas. So those will be 2 big tough tests for the Longhorns if they want to prove that they are legitimate for this season. And for Michigan, I'm not sure where you go from here. I mean, you're right now 1-1. You have USC coming up in 2 weeks, and you still have Oregon and Ohio State to end the season. So I'm not sure where Michigan finishes the end of the year. It was a team that I said to myself, you know what? They don't look as good as on paper as they did last season, but I still think they could squeak into the college football playoff. I'm not so certain of it now after what happened this past weekend. So
Yeah,
I'm curious to see
I
how they
was
finish
I
off.
wasn't buying the Michigan Kool Aid early on. Obviously they had a fantastic season last year, but it's time to pass the torch. And Michigan's going to go probably back into college football irrelevance for the time being. Not saying that they can't come back, but the next year or two they're going to have some downtime.
Yeah, it looks like
Uh,
they're going to lose. Like it looks like
USC, Oregon, you still have Ohio State in the Big Ten.
right.
It didn't get any weaker. It's the second strongest conference in football. You're bound, and you're losing the best head coach that the school's had in 25 years.
You lost your head coach, your quarterback, your
You're
running
gonna
back.
regress, and it's okay.
Like it's tough. It's not ideal. But I mean, listen, it paid off for a national championship, so at least you got the title out of it. But yeah, they look to be on pace to lose at least 3, maybe even 4 games of Big Ten play this season after this past weekend. So only time's going to tell what happens for this Michigan team after this week. But like I mentioned, Texas, they look pretty good right now, and that's exactly what they're hoping to have. Because if this is Quinn Ewers' last season, he wants to go out with a bang and at least give Texas their first national title since I think 2005. So
Yeah,
this is a good
it would be
opportunity to do
20
so.
years in the making. This is going to be the 20th anniversary this upcoming year. So it's not going to be like, oh, this is the 20th season, yada yada, stuff like that. This is going to be the 20th season. So
Yeah,
it would be something for this fan base that's been kind of hungry. They have the donors. Uh, Texas is probably the football state you want to play in if you're a player. It's going to be interesting. That's all I know.
yeah. Well, speaking of interesting, we had a very interesting game in Stillwater this past weekend as well, as Arkansas went into the 16th ranked Cowboys of Oklahoma State. And it looked like the Cowboys were in trouble early on in the second half, Johnson. They were down 21 to 10 in the third quarter. 21 to 7 in the third quarter. They got a couple field goals to make it a one possession game going into the fourth quarter. That's kind of where their offense started to finally pick up after a very slow start in this game. Uh, great, great overall game for Alan Bowman. Excuse me. I think he had three passing touchdowns or one passing touchdown. Excuse me. I'm looking at my stats wrong. One passing touchdown for him. 326 yards was the stat I was looking for, and they needed it considering Ollie Gordon, the star running back, had a very slow day rushing wise, and considering that they were also down multiple possessions, couldn't really run the football as they would have liked to. Um, and you got to give your tip of the cap to Arkansas. Played a very strong offensive game. Taylor Green, 416, a touchdown, as well as Jaquindon Jackson with 24 for 149 and three rushing touchdowns. A very strong game from the Razorbacks, but unfortunately, Oklahoma State is able to hold on in double overtime and win this one 39 to 31. And it's kind of what we expected going into this game as well. We expected maybe a little bit of a more high scoring affair between these two teams. And in the end, the Cowboys get the win, remain 2-0. They've had some scares to start off the season already, but they are now off to a 2-0 start as they look to try to prove themselves to be the top of the class in the Big 12.
Man, oh man, what can I really add to that, Nick? You really summed it up nicely. This was one hell of a game, and I'm still salty about the cover here. I am never going
That
to
was
get
a
over
bad.
that.
We had a couple bad beats this
That is
week
a
in college
not only a
football.
bad beat, that is a beyond bad beat. To lose 7.5 is the spread, and it's overtime, and you lose that cover.
Yeah,
That's horrific.
considering that they were up 14 at one point in the first half.
Yeah, that is
Like you
that
would
is
think
the
you were okay.
this is nightmare fuel. But you got to tip your hat because I knew that the SEC is a very very tough conference, and I figured 7.5 points, even with Oklahoma State, 7.5 points was disrespectful for the Razorbacks, and I'm still going to stick by that based on that performance this past weekend.
Yeah, Arkansas definitely might is still going to be a team to very that will be competitive in the SEC. They're still kind of in the little bit of a rebuilding stage as of now, but they'll look out for them the next couple of years and see what they potentially could threat some of these higher tier class teams in the SEC. And that's what they were trying to do this past weekend and try to beat a Big 12 team in Oklahoma State that a lot of people, including myself, are picking to win the Big 12 this year and try to make it to college football playoffs. So very valiant effort. It just unfortunately did not go their way in this one as they lose by 8 to the Cowboys and drop to 1-1 on the season. Another team that dropped to 1-1 season is also another Big 12 team, Johnson, and that was Colorado. And I give the tip of the cap to Arkansas and their matchup with Oklahoma State. I don't know if you can really give that to Colorado for their effort in this one against Nebraska. A very ugly loss against the Cornhuskers in which we saw Shador Sanders struggle for a couple of different reasons. Most of the biggest one being that his offensive line just struggled against this pass rush of the Cornhuskers. Dylan Raiola did just enough offensively to get the Cornhuskers their 21 points of offense that they got in this game. And it's a 2-0 start for Matt Rule and the Nebraska Cornhuskers. They enter the top 25 polls going into week number 3 this week. And for Colorado now, they have to see how they can bounce back from this loss. They dropped to 1-1 now on the season, and an an interstate rivalry coming up this weekend with Colorado State.
Yeah, I mean it's becoming kind of a circus there in Colorado, and I really, really hate saying that, but you see the reports like, "Oh yeah, the band can't play the music predetermined; they have to play Shador's rap song instead when he scores a touchdown." Like
Shador's throwing, people are saying Shador's been throwing his team under the bus, which it doesn't look good on his part either because when the draft comes up this coming
this is
April,
all character stuff
this is all character stuff that could potentially cost him the number one overall pick and could cost him a lot of money.
because no one is ever going to question his talent. His talent is absolutely unbelievable. One of the strongest quarterback prospects we've seen over the last 5 years. I would say probably the strongest prospect ranking since Trevor Lawrence, at least prospect wise in college. If you see him just throw the ball, he makes plays with his feet. He has that. He can still run a. He's not really a pocket passer, but he can still roll into that if necessary. He's just a phenomenal player. So
Right.
this character stuff scares everyone, and we hope it's not true.
Yeah, I think it was a bad look. He mentioned how he said in his post game, he said how many times did Raiola get pressured and have to step back and get sacked in that game by the Colorado defense, and that's pretty much maybe not only a shot towards his offensive line, but pretty much almost a shot towards the defensive line for the Colorado Buffaloes. Um, it was just a really overall bad performance for them in this game. This is a very high profile game, considering the fact that we both mentioned it that whoever won this game was going to get ranked in the top 25, and that's exactly what happened for Nebraska. They are ranked this upcoming weekend, going into week 3, but
Which is well
Colorado,
deserved, by the way. This program,
absolutely,
this Nebraska program, has gone through hell. And
yeah.
is Matt Rule the person? Is he the guy?
Well, think about it.
Is he the savior?
Think what Matt Rule has done in his coaching career. He's built up some programs in his recent memory, and that's why he got an NFL job. That's why he was, it wasn't a great NFL tenure, but he got the NFL. He got the Panthers job for an exact reason. Remember what he did at Baylor after that whole scandal that they had. He rebuilt Baylor to what they became. He made Temple for a little bit of time a very good marking spot because he was the OC there, and then, becomes the head coach after going to the NFL for a season. He was on the Giants. And then he goes back to Temple, becomes the head coach for 3 years. That leads him to the Baylor job. He did great things at Baylor, and then that led him to get in the NFL job with the Panthers. Now, as I mentioned, it didn't go well in the NFL for him. So he goes back to college here in Nebraska. And for the most part, he's done a pretty good job with this school. Now, you get a high profile quarterback in Dylan Raiola, who was one of the top quarterbacks, I think the number one quarterback, actually, in this past recruiting class, and to get him to come to Nebraska and build, buy in to the foundation that they're trying to build there and try to restore the prestige that Nebraska once had back in the late 90s, early 2000s. It's a good look so far for Matt Rule, and this could help them. This can not only help him, but for this entire university down the line as they try to become, maybe a potential threat in the Big Ten. We've seen obviously what happened with Michigan this past week. We keep talking about teams like Oregon, Ohio State, maybe Penn State if they don't choke, and they almost did this past week. But maybe Nebraska is another team that we talk about at the end of the season for the Big Ten and trying to threaten those top tier teams and maybe be a sneaky college football playoff team as the year ends. And for Colorado, I mean, the Big 12 is certainly open for you, but they have to play better because I feel like they're at a point also where they're very inconsistent, where you have a good offense and you're expecting that offense to score points, and then you go from week 1 having a I would say a very good offensive game to week 2 having a really bad offensive game. Now there's all these questions about your offensive line and your character issues with Shedeur Sanders, and with the rivalry game coming up this week, that could really lean into Colorado State pulling off what a lot of people would consider to be an upset. So Colorado's got to avoid that this upcoming weekend.
And it's a real shame because it hasn't happened yet, but we've seen this happen with so many programs. And what I'm talking about is, like, think of Wake Forest the last couple of years. Think of NC State. All these programs that were on the rise and they think they could finally do this and they just fall flat. I'm fearful that that may happen with Nebraska. It's definitely way too early to tell, but that kind of seeps into the back of my mind, like these old schools trying to become prominent in college football going
That's
into
what
the next
Colorado's trying
century.
to do too.
Yeah, and like, you know what? It's a real shame because I hope
They're
Nebraska
probably in
doesn't
that.
fall flat on their face. They're all in the same territory.
Colorado's probably in that same territory as well because
Oh, they definitely are.
once Shador goes to the NFL, I mean, who knows what the status of Dion's going to be at the end of the season? Is he going to
Yeah,
buy into the university or he's good? All I'm saying is if
the university has bought into him, but is Dion going to buy into
Has
the university?
right? Has Dion bought into Colorado? All I'm going to say is, if Florida State continues to have a bad season and Norville maybe gets fired,
You
I
can
don't
see
see
a
why he
coaching
wouldn't.
swap here.
I don't see why he wouldn't go back to his alma mater and coach the Seminoles. He would certainly buy into that program. We know that for a fact. But
And
I
the
don't know.
recruiting, it would be so much easier recruiting like that
Right?
too.
Absolutely. I mean the amount of players you get in the Florida, pipeline, and then just Dion alone, that will want players to want to go there. So that's probably something to monitor as the season goes on. I mean, how Colorado not only finishes, but how Florida State potentially finishes, because who knows what's
Yeah,
going to happen with that.
because Florida State adds a whole other aspect to this ball game that a lot of people really aren't thinking about. I'm not thinking about Florida State right now. Um, one time you really thinking about them that they're 0-2 on the season, which is pretty funny, but
Yeah.
it's more of a joke than anything else.
Well, with that all being said, Jonathan, let's go into our final game of this slate this past weekend, and that was a big game in Eugene between Boise State and Oregon. The third matchup, I believe, in the program's history between the two squads, and Boise State had won the previous two matchups, including a matchup the last time these two teams met in Eugene, which I think was in 2009. I think this was one of the Kellen Moore years for the Broncos. So obviously, Oregon coming off a very close win in week number one, a lot of question marks considering the low amount of points that they scored despite the absurd amount of yards that they had in that game. I think about near 600 yards offensively. And we saw what happened with Boise State. I mean, it's Ashton Jonty, I think it's pronounced.
Jaunty.
Uh, Jonty.
Yes, sir.
Um,
At least that's my understanding. If it is incorrect, I apologize.
yeah, we're never good with pronunciations, especially me. But how about the game in week one he had? I mean, I think he had 260
Like
some.
240 yards or something like that. I know he's close to almost 500. 267.
He's at 459 rushing yards so far to start the season. That's including this game he just had this past week. He had 267 and 6 touchdowns in week one. This week he had 192 and 3 touchdowns. So he's already cementing his case, maybe potentially at the end of the
Not as
season for the
Heisman.
Heisman Trophy winner.
I can't. You think someone from
He's
Boise
probably
State
not.
not?
He's
I
not
think.
going to win
Listen,
it. He's going to
I
be
think he
close.
is. I think he is definitely Heisman material because not only did he do this, okay, it's against a mid major, but he's doing this against high major program now. Not only any high major, it's not like he's going, oh yeah, he did it against Syracuse. No offense, Nick.
Oh, whoa.
He's doing against Oregon. He's doing. I mean,
You could have picked
he could
any
probably do it
school.
against Oklahoma State. He could listen. Syracuse is the one that comes to mind because it's not like they're bad, but it's not like they're good, right? They're Syracuse.
Kyle McCord will lead me to the bullshit.
Mediocrity. I know
I
7 to 8
I
wins.
will I
If
will
you go
take an 8
8-5, you'll
or
go nuts.
I will take an 8 or 9 win year. I would happily accept that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say. But anyway,
Right. I get
uh,
what you're saying. I get what you're getting at.
it's not like he's doing against. Oh yeah, it's just any mid major. No, he did this against Oregon. So Oregon they have 5 stars there. They have the alumni base. They have all this public funding, and they took Oregon to the
I mean, yeah,
wire.
they got the
You
what
want to
was
talk
it?
about the wire? Like that was it. Like the field goal in the last couple of seconds of a game. They were leading in the fourth quarter. It's crazy.
Phil
The only
Knight's Nike,
and you
right?
know what? Say it again.
Phil Knight, Nike, right? He's
Yes,
the founder. Yeah, I mean, he's funding most of
Oregon.
Oregon's athletics.
Yeah,
Pretty much all
he's
of it.
older now. He's in his 80s. He wants the national
He wants
championship.
to see United.
And
Yeah.
outside of the Dylan Gabriel bomb of a touchdown early in the third quarter, there were no offensive touchdowns for the rest of the game. I guess you could call them offensive touchdowns. There's a punt return TD and a kick return TD late in the fourth and in the third quarter. But they
Yeah.
weren't passing the ball. They were getting smoked. They weren't run the ball well. They were getting smoked in the second half. If special teams did not bail them out, Oregon's probably on the outside looking into college football playoffs right now.
Yeah, I think for Oregon, I mean, there's definitely been some scares to start the season. Obviously, the matchup with Idaho in week one, and then this matchup here in week two. And we knew that I had a feeling this was going to be a close game. We talked about it in the rundown last week in the Mushing Hour. And I did not expect Oregon to win big. I thought I had a feeling that their offense was going to be better after what happened in week one, but their defense always is an eyesore, and especially in a matchup like this because we saw what Boise State is capable offensively, and as long as Jonte runs the way he's been running, they're going to be able to score a lot of touchdowns, and he scored a bunch of big touchdowns, including a 70-yarder in this past game. But as you mentioned, Oregon gets the game-winning field goal at the end to hold on 37-34. So two big scares for the Ducks to start the year, but they do start off the season 2-0, and they also will be going into a rivalry game this upcoming weekend. So a lot more emotion going into this upcoming week. And as you mentioned also, they still have some big games of the season. They're still playing Ohio State. They're still going to the big house to play Michigan, and then still going to Wisconsin, and they're still playing Washington. I mean, Pac-12 rivalry still, even though it's now in the Big Ten. So they still have some tough games on the schedule as the season comes to, as we wind down the season later on. But there's still maybe a little bit of a concern that they aren't playing the way they had hoped they had been playing these first 2 weeks, but they're still grateful at the end of the day to be in this 2-0 start to the year.
Yeah, and I guess with that being said, I think we're gonna do our top 25 recap before we head into our mushing hour.
Yes, sir. A couple of notes for this top 25. A lot of changes, especially. We had that big top 10 matchup that was going to result in one team moving up and one team moving down regardless. So that led to Texas become the new number 2 team in the country, especially after the fashion that they won in that game. That resulted in Michigan dropping down from 10 to 17. That was probably to be expected the way that game went. Obviously, the Notre Dame loss that led to a big change. Notre Dame dropped 13 spots from 5 to 18. So that's where we're trying. That's where we've been saying that their chances of the CFP really go down because of this
It's
shocking
still open
loss.
though. It's still open. If they go
It's still there
undefeated,
for the
they'd still
taking.
probably sneak in. That's the sick part.
Right. It's still there for the taking, but it was not what they needed to happen this past week. A team that certainly improved their stock this past weekend was Tennessee. Dominating win on the road against NC State in that top 25 matchup. The Volunteers are looking great to start the season, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Now they are the 7th-ranked team in the country going into week number 3. We saw Miami enter the top 10 at number 10. Oregon did drop down 2 spots despite their win over Boise. So they have been dropping. They started the year off number 3. Now they're number 9. Number 9 in the country. So a little bit of a concern for the Ducks, as I mentioned earlier on. We also had a couple new teams enter the rankings. Teams like Iowa State, who pulled off a big win, a comeback win over Iowa this past week. Nebraska, we mentioned, pulled off that win over Colorado. Boston College, we saw in week 1 what they did to Florida State. They are the number 24th ranked team in the country. And as I mentioned earlier on in the show, Northern Illinois, for the first time since 2013, is ranked after their stunning defeat over the Irish. So a lot to unpack after this week number 2. I'm kind of salty for obvious reasons after my team beat a ranked team this week, but I can understand why
Not
the
yet.
yeah,
Every
no, no,
dog
no,
has their day.
right. I can understand why the 4 non-ranked teams from last week that are ranked this week are in the rankings. So I'm not going to be too salty about it. All I'm going to say is Syracuse can beat Stanford this week. That could help their chances for sure. And like I said to you, I'm just happy to be 2-0 right now and have a quarterback that's actually playing at a very high level right now because we haven't had that since God knows how long. So I'll take whatever I can get. But anything that really stood out to you for the top 25 as before we head into our mushing hour?
Oh man, that's a great question. I think it didn't really stand out to me. I've been saying this kind of beat this drum a lot. Hey Nick, tell me what these schools have in common. Number 1 Georgia, number 2 Texas, number 4 Alabama, number 5 Ole Miss, number 6 Mizzou, number 7 Tennessee.
There would be all in the SEC. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, this team is literally the SEC and Ohio State in the top 7.
Yep. Yeah.
And there are more teams in the SEC that are ranked, or at
And there's
least
still
one other
more.
team, I believe.
There's still LSU. Yeah, there's still LSU and
LSU
Oklahoma
and
as well.
Oklahoma. So
Yeah.
you want to talk about 6 of the top 7, and then 8 of the top 16 in this region of the country.
Yeah, they're half of the top 16.
And you know what? If you want to talk about just Southern football in general, I guess Miami's geographically
They're in
speaking,
that southern
Miami's
region.
in
Yeah.
the South, but they're
Yeah.
not really Southern. You could throw in Louisville. You could throw in Clemson in there too. So these teams in the southern part of the United States are accounting for 40% of the best teams in college football. That's a crazy,
I
crazy
think
statistic.
what isn't shocking also is that what these rankings are currently listed at right now, it's still very early in the season, but this is kind of what we expected. We knew the
Yeah, this is what
SEC was
we.
going to be at the top of the class. We knew the Big Ten still has a couple of teams up there as well, even just around the top 25. And we knew that the ACC really probably wouldn't be as top heavy. You only have the
They're
two
just
ranked
happy to be
teams,
here. They're happy
right?
to be
You
here for a
you have
couple
the
more
three ranked
seasons.
teams you have in Miami, Clemson, and Boston College, and then the Big 12 has been surprisingly off to a good start this year as well. They've had a couple of ranked teams in Utah, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, and Arizona, which is still tough for me to, and Iowa State. I'm still getting used to these new conferences. It's going to take me a while to get used to it. But this is what we kind of expected to start the season. Not maybe the Notre Dame loss in Northern Illinois was, but this is what we expected to start the year. These teams being ranked in the fashion that they are currently in, and how top heavy some of these conferences are, because that's what we expected once the conference realignments went down this past offseason. And it's showing so far through the first 2 weeks, and now leads us to a very interesting week number 3 with a couple of, I would say, not going into the year, not top tier games that we expected going into this week, but there are certainly games now that are certainly on our radar now going in to this upcoming week number 3, which will lead us, Johnson, into our mushing hour.
Yep, and everyone who has been listening for a while, this is a play on the witching hour where wins become losses and losses become wins. I am having a great mushing hour because I am mushing these teams into oblivion. 3-11 on the season. This is
Yeah,
probably
it's
the worst start I've had in a while. I won eight. I hit 57% of my picks last year, and I'm
yeah,
batting around 25% right now, which means I'm due. Nick is batting a little bit above 50%. He's 8-7 so far, so uh,
that
he is
Colorado game really screwed me.
yeah, I mean, all these games screwed me
I'm just
really.
happy I took a Q's money line and they actually pulled it out for me and they got the win. I'm very
I
grateful for
took
that.
Q's plus free, but I thought Georgia Tech was going to win. That was a stupid bet to begin with.
And
All
they
right,
almost Q's almost choked it at the end. They almost got it for you. They almost got it for
almost,
you. I was very concerned.
almost. The Q's game was rough. The Arkansas game was rough, and the Iowa game was
The
rough. These other games, yeah, I kind of deserved it.
the
Oregon minus
one
19,
game,
Michigan plus 7.5.
yeah, you talk about that game. That was the one game that was, we talked about bad beats. For me, that was the luckiest beat I had all week. For
Was
those that
Iowa?
don't know, no, the Michigan game, because the over under for that game, at least going into the week, not, it wasn't the final line going into the game, but going into the week that we covered it, it was 43.5, and Michigan scored a late garbage time touchdown that made it 31-12. So it set the top, the final score at 43. They tried to go for 2 points instead of going for the extra point, and they didn't convert the 2 points, so it stayed at 43. So for anyone that had the under 43 and a half when the week started, you were sweating a bit, but you got the win. So that's at least one of the times. That's one of the only times you'll actually be grateful for a good beat when it comes to betting. But there was a lot of bad beats this week for sure, and that Arkansas game definitely was one. The Iowa game was also another one, even though Iowa would not have covered, even if the field goal wasn't hit by Iowa State. But I digress. There's a couple of
Yeah,
bad
I mean,
beats as well.
it was just rough overall because it would have been -2
All
instead of -2.5. It was just
yeah.
rough.
All I'll say is that if you think this was bad, folks, when we break down our NFL Week 1 picks, it gets way worse. We had a
Absolutely.
very bad week number 1 in the NFL.
Yeah, I wasn't very good in the. I mean, I was very good in the NFL last year, so it was a little surprising to me. But
Yeah,
I'll
it's
bounce back.
listen, it's still early. We have time to make this up, but for those that have been, I hope, hopefully for your sake, you haven't been telling all of these picks. For those listening at
I'm
home,
due now. I'm due now. I went two
you,
and five. Spoiler alert on
uh,
NFL. 3-11 so far of college. I'm due,
we still got one game tonight in the NFL to determine how our week's going to officially end. So
and I'm
we'll break
hoping
all
it's a
that
snooze
down.
fest.
Right. Well, it probably will be. We'll see. We'll break that down this upcoming weekend when we recap week number 1 and go into our preview of week number 2 in the National Football League. But Johnson, would you like me to preview some of the games upcoming for this upcoming week?
We can do alternating. I'm going to start us off
All right, go ahead.
with number 20 Arizona. The Wildcats are on the road going to Kansas State to take on the Wildcats.
There you go. I was
How's that going to
concerned.
work out?
Yeah, I thought you were gonna pull up the Iowa Wolves again.
No, no, no. I thought the Jayhawks for a second. That's
Yeah,
Kansas.
no.
They're away, taking on the number 14 Kansas State
They're in
Wildcats at
Manhattan.
home. So this is yes in Manhattan, Kansas, not Manhattan, New York City. For those who are wondering.
Right.
We do have some international listeners so it's Manhattan, Kansas, not Manhattan, New York City. So it's not a football stadium in the middle of Fifth Avenue. It's a this is in the middle of this
That
is
would
the
be
good old
electric.
Midwest. It would be electric. We should have it.
Yeah.
2008. Well, I'm not getting into this anyway.
Yeah.
We should have a
Yeah.
football stadium
We,
in
we've
Manhattan.
got off track.
Anyway, Kansas State minus 7.5 points at home. 56.5 is the slated over under. Give me Arizona plus 7.5. I think they lose by a touchdown exactly. That's why I think Arizona will be just on the good side of a potential bad beat. So give me Arizona plus 7.5.
Yeah, this could be. I think that actually, now that I'm looking at it, Johnson, the line did change. It's now -7 Kansas State, the over under 56 and a
Well,
half.
I had
So,
it locked in at 7.5, so I'm gonna keep it like that. You can
yeah,
abide by your rules, but when I wrote this
bye
down,
bye point.
it was
Bye.
seven and a
Yeah.
half.
What I am expecting though is a high scoring game. You got a former Pac-12 team taking on that's now a Big 12 team taking on, of course, a mainstay. I guess you would say it in the Big 12. So for that reason only, I'm going to take the over in this one. I expect a very high scoring game. It's on Friday night, so they're pretty much the primetime game this upcoming Friday. They're going to be a lot of eyes, maybe potentially, are going to be on this matchup between these two. A lot of good playmakers from the two squads, and we're going to find out who's the true Wildcat, Johnson, between these two squads. So I got the over in this one between Arizona and Kansas State.
Battle of the Wildcat name. That's what we can call this the Wildcat Bowl.
Wildcat ball, yeah. I like it. I like it. All right, I'll preview our next game, and that's a very interesting game that we have. Not one you really see too often that's happening this upcoming week in Madison. As the number 4 ranked team, Alabama, the Crimson Tide go in to Madison, Wisconsin to take on the Badgers of Wisconsin. And this could be a tough one for the Badgers, obviously. They're off to a 2-0 start, but when you're playing Alabama, never easy whatsoever. The Tide are going into this game as a 16-point favorite with the over-under at 51.5. Do you think Wisconsin covers at all, Johnson, or is Bama just going to roll in this one?
Nope. The ghost of Paul Christ, who is very much well alive, is going to continue to haunt this program for a wrongful termination.
Okay.
Listen, he's an offensive assistant. He's a special assistant to the head coach at Texas. So happens that Quinn Ewers starts playing the best football of his life as soon as he gets there, and Wisconsin's in a downfall since they fired him. So give me Bama minus 16.
Yeah, we're going to have our first mush. I'm also going with Bama -16. Wisconsin hasn't looked great their first two games of the season, and Bama, despite a slow start against South Florida this past Saturday, they ended the game really, really strongly. I
Remember,
expect Bama
kids,
to. I expect Bama to roll. No pun intended, but I expect them to roll in this game.
well, Brian's going to be very happy about that. And remember, kids, at Wisconsin, where they have rigorous academic standards, where it's hard to get anything above a three-star recruit, you get fired for having over 72% winning percentage all
And
time at that school. Remember,
you,
kids, that is
you gotta
72% is not good enough for Wisconsin, where they can't even accept 90% of players.
you got to keep in mind too. For if you talk about recruiting, this is probably going to be a big game that they bring some recruits in because next year they're going into Tuscaloosa, so they need to. This is a coming out party, I guess you want if you want to put it like that, or maybe a rebirth party for Wisconsin this week if they maybe can pull off this upset over the Tide. But you and I both agree, we just don't see it happening yet for them.
Oh yeah, 55 points against FCS South Dakota and Western Michigan
It's
has me
not been
shaking
good.
in the boots.
Yeah,
Alabama could probably do that in 3 quarters and then park it.
they were expecting a big offensive year considering they got Tyler Van Dyke from Miami, but it has not been the case whatsoever for the Badgers. So I expect Wisconsin, or excuse me, I expect Alabama to handle the Badgers this week in Madison. What do we have next?
Well, that's a great question because we have the number 16 LSU Tigers, go Tigers, going into South Carolina to take on
The
the
Tigers.
Gamecocks. Even though South Carolina is at home, LSU is a 7.5 point favorite, and 52.5 is the slated over
These
under.
lines keep changing us, Johnson. I'm sorry.
I listen. I have it locked in,
Okay,
so
that's
that's
fine.
what I'm going with. You could let the viewers know what has it
Oh.
changed because when we did this earlier, this is what it was. I'm gonna take LSU minus 7.5, and you could change it to 8 or 7. I'm still gonna take the Tigers here.
Yeah, the line now is LSU -7 with the over under 50.5.
Oh, so it
This
even
is
got better. So
yeah.
I'm still gonna stick to 7.5 though because that's the that is fair.
Um, I'm not really. I like what South Carolina maybe is going to bring. Not now, but like later on. I love their quarterback Lenora Sellers. I think he's one of the more underrated quarterbacks the SEC is going to have in the next couple of years. But LSU is just in a spot where they can't really afford to lose after already losing to start the season. Um, we saw South Carolina dominate Kentucky this past week. I just don't think they have enough right now to beat the Tigers, even being at home. And a lot of coverage will be on this game, obviously. This is where college game day is going to be this week. But I'll go with LSU minus 7 in this one. I think the Tigers just Graham Nussmeier has been off to, a shaky first game, but he rebounds back in his second week of the season. I think they keep that momentum going into South Carolina this week, and they beat the Gamecocks to move to 2-1 the season.
I like the
That will lead,
analysis.
and that will lead us to our another game in the SEC this upcoming weekend. As number one Georgia is going in to Lexington, Kentucky, to take on the Wildcats of Kentucky. I mentioned Kentucky had a bad loss to South Carolina this past week, a 31-6 loss to the Gamecocks. Now they got to play the number one team in the country, so good luck with that. Georgia minus 24 favorite, 45.5 is now the over-under. So again, this is another one, Johnson, that just changed in the last couple of minutes. We have 23.5, 46.5. Up to you, whatever you want to do for your pick here, but I'm assuming I know where you're going to go with this one.
Let Georgia keep on cooking until we are proven otherwise. Give me Georgia minus 23.5, and I think highly of the Kentucky program. I really want them to come back. But Georgia, until the jury, until the fat lady sings, I'm going to keep on taking Georgia points because that seemed to work out for me last year. So going back to last year, Georgia points is almost always a lock.
And that proved in week one when they beat down Clemson. So it's certainly the case. I am with you. I'm also taking the Georgia spread. I'll go with our line that we originally had 23.5. Even if it's 24, I still think Georgia is going to roll in this game. I'm not confident right now in Kentucky. And Georgia's playing on another level right now to start the season, already 2-0. And Carson Beck with 7 passing touchdowns to start the year as well. They are looking very, very strong in this 2024 campaign. Let's go into one of or I should say, the only rival game that we're realistically covering this
This is
upcoming
not
week,
the Apple
Johnson.
Cup. I forget the
No,
name of
this
this
is
though.
the Civil War.
The Civil War. Yes, we have number 9 Oregon going into Oregon State. So this is I'm going to call this a home game for both these teams because this is the same state. Even though this is happening at Oregon State, it's not like, oh my God, Oregon has this long trek across the country like they do for a lot of these other games. It's right in state. So Oregon minus 16 points, technically on the road. 50.5 is the slated over under. Give me Oregon State plus 16. They always play this team close. It's going to be a close game. And Oregon State, I still think is a little jaded for being left behind after having one of the better programs last year. So give me Oregon State plus
You think
16.
uh you think they're missing DJ Uiagalelei?
I think they miss him dearly.
You think
Miss
they
him
miss him
dearly.
dearly? Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They miss him dearly so much. They're using his
Go,
uh, his
go ahead.
transfer. They're using his transfer papers to go wipe the tears from their face every single time they see
Oh,
him
okay.
throw an interception or throw the ball at the
Mm,
devil on the ground.
I got you. Regardless of that statement, I'm just gonna pretend I didn't hear that. I'm gonna take the Ducks minus 16. I think this is the week that they're trying to prove that these first 2 weeks have been bad. They're trying to get that stench away for what's happened in the first 2 weeks. I think what better way to do that against a rival, a former Pac-12, teammate of theirs in Oregon State. I'll say this: I'm very happy at least that this game is still going on, despite the fact that these two teams are now in separate conferences. But I think the Ducks get this one and go to 3-0 on the young season. And then we have, I would say, a potential sleeper game, Johnson, this upcoming week. As Tulane is going to go in to Norman. They're going to go in to play Oklahoma this upcoming weekend. The Sooners are off to a 2-0 start. Tulane lost a backbreaker of a game in a game in which I thought, I'm going to admit, Johnson, I mushed them. I'm going to admit it to the world, I mushed them. And for those that don't know, Tulane was up 10 at halftime, and I texted Johnson to tell him about it. Tulane proceeded to lose by a touchdown at the end of the game. So any Green
It
Wave
happens.
fan, I'm sorry. That one's on me. But remember, I picked Tulane at the beginning of the season to make the college football playoff as my sleeper pick. So that's why I was really hoping that they would pull off that win. But I will say, I think they've got a good shot this upcoming weekend against the Sooners. Oklahoma in this game is a minus 14-point favorite. The over under 50.5. Who do you got on this one, Johnson?
I have the Green Wave covering plus 14. That's my pick here. I think Oklahoma is an excellent team, but I think Tulane will kind of have a fire lit up under them from what they kind of could have had last week. And they're not going to win, but it's going to be a close game.
Yeah, that was such a bad break for Tulane. Being a ranked team in your second game of the season probably gets them ranked going into this matchup with the Sooners. It probably would be the game to watch, and I still think it's going to be the game to watch this upcoming week for all intent purposes. I am also going to go with Tulane. I'm kind of upset that you picked the plus 14 because I thought you would go with Oklahoma in this one. But I have to pick Tulane to at least cover. Hopefully, maybe they pull off the upset in this game to further state my stake in them making the college football playoff. Oklahoma looked pretty bad last week also against Houston, and that's maybe a little bit of an eyesore going into this game. So I think Tulane will play with their hearts out. I just don't want to. I just have a bad feeling they're gonna probably lose again. So I at least think they'll cover and maybe lose by a touchdown at the very worst against the Sooners. How about this next game upcoming, Johnson? Even though these two teams are unranked,
Man, we have my Texas A&M Aggies, go Aggies, gig 'em, going into the swamp to take on Florida. Florida at home is a 4 point underdog, so that means A&M favored by 4 points. 47.5 is the slated over under.
just how far has Florida fallen? They're a four
I'm
point
going to take
underdog in this game.
I'm going to take Florida plus 4 because I still think they recover. I hope the Aggies win, but I'm taking Florida plus 4 because I'm still not counting them out after that embarrassment last week.
I think they
Um,
announced that both quarterbacks, Mertz and Lagway, are going to start for Florida. I think both of them are going to start this game. So I don't know if
yeah,
that helps
Wegman
Florida
had
or
a
not.
great
I don't know.
game previously. I realized it was Tarleton State. I believe it was Tarleton State. No, it was McNeese.
Sanford.
It was McNeese.
No, Sanford.
Oh,
Oh, you're talking
A&M?
about. Oh no, I thought you were talking about Florida. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking
Yeah, yeah,
about.
yeah. A&M
You
played.
said Wegman. I thought you said Lagway. That's my bad. That's my bad.
No, 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 no. A&M played McNeese, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
they
yes,
played the
yes,
McNeese
yes.
State Cowboys, and I know it's a tune-up game, but he looked very good, so that gives me some faith.
Well, both these teams had 2-0 games last week, so this they're both kind of going into this game more fresh and feel a little bit more confident about their offenses after a very poor performance in week one, both for both of these teams offensively. Um, yeah, this is a tough game for me. I don't know where I like trusting Florida at this rate for me is so tough to think. I would feel like as if you look at their schedule, this is probably a game that they need to win because it's not going to get any easier after that. But I'm going to pick Texas A&M to cover. I think Texas A&M wins this game. I can't type right now, and I still think, despite how they looked in Week One, Texas A&M, I think they are the better team on paper compared to Florida. I'm just not really sold on the Gators right now. I think they're, like I mentioned when we recapped their game against Miami, I think they're in for a long season, and this probably drops them to 1-2. I feel like A&M is going to hold on. I think they win this one by a touchdown. So it'll still be a close game regardless between these two teams. And then finally, to round out this upcoming mushing hour for us, as well as this week number 3, this is one of the matchups, Johnson, that I mentioned at the beginning that we did not expect to be a game that we circle on our calendars going into this season. But the way the season has gone, it's now a matchup we're going to be looking at this upcoming week. Number 24 Boston College goes into Columbia, Missouri to take on the Tigers of Missouri, who are the 6th ranked team in the country. Missouri goes into this one at a minus 16.5 point favorite. The over under 54.5. Who do you have in this one?
Give me BC plus 16.5, even though I'm still salty they orchestrated a coup in the Big East over 20 years ago. I'm still mad about that, so I'm going to take BC to lose by 15 points.
I want to see Bill O'Brien succeed for this team.
I do too. I like Bill. have personal vendetta against BC.
Yeah, that's understandable. I mean, listen, we've seen Missouri so far. I mean, they haven't really played top tier competition, but they've pitched a shutout in both of their games so far this season. So Boston College is looking to put the first points in the season up against this Missouri Tigers defense. So we'll have to see if what happens in that. For me, going into this one, I want to believe that Boston College could pull this off. I don't know if they're just ready to be one of these big top tier teams in the SEC. I know a lot of people don't look at Missouri compared to teams like Texas and Georgia and Bama. I would say there's kind of on that same tier with a team like Ole Miss, where they're not 1A, but they're like the next. They're not maybe the A tier, but I would say they're the B tier, or the B tier, excuse me, of the SEC. So for that reason, I'm going to take Missouri to cover. It's a lot of points. I am taking the risk of that happening, but I think we see a different animal in the Tigers this week. No pun intended. I think Missouri comes out strong. They prove, they make a statement to the rest of the entire world, and they prove to everyone that listen, we're shooing maybe to make the college football playoff this season, and we're not going to lie down for these teams like I mentioned earlier. They're looking to be one of those top dogs in the SEC, and I think they get it done this upcoming weekend against Boston College.
And I think that will do it for us, Nick. You can take us home.
Okay. One final note for me. Go Qs, beat Stanford. That's all I'm going to say about that. Any final note from you?
Go Aggies.
Even though you took, yeah, you know what? Yeah, you still said they were
I
going to
took
win.
them +4.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. You said they were going to win. All right. That's fair enough. All right, so that's going to do it then for this week's edition of the All Gas No Break Sports Show. As I mentioned, a wild, wild week number 2 in college football with a big upset happening in South Bend, as well as that top 10 matchup in Ann Arbor. Congratulations to the winners of those 2 games being Northern Illinois and Texas, as they are now more intact in their top 25 status going into week number 3. How will week 3 unfold? We'll have to see how it all unfolds with some of these matchups that we have, including that big matchup in Missouri between the Boston College Eagles and the Missouri Tigers. Tune in next week to find out how it all unfolds, and we'll see what happens going into week number 4. But as we mentioned, this will not be our only episode this week, as we will also be recapping the NFL Week 1 going into week number 2. Not a good week for Johnson and I picking wise. We'll try to make sure we could get our correct picks for week number 2 and go and have a better mushing hour for this NFL season. This has been Nicholas Pavona, joined alongside with Andrew Johnson for the All Gas No Break Sports Show. Have a great rest of your day.